Imagine a world where artificial intelligence is, rewriting its own code faster than any human can track.
Right.
A world where people would literally rather live next to a nuclear power plant than an AI data center.
Yeah, which is crazy to think about.
Exactly.
Mm.
And a reality where the energy demands of computing are pushing humanity to seriously look toward building infrastructure in outer space.
Deep space, yeah.
Sound like a sci-fi thriller. It's actually just a snapshot of the news from May 15th, 2026.
It's just a Tuesday.
Right. Today's show is an inspiring celebration of impossible ideas and the minds brave enough to chase them down. Finding passengers bold enough to embark on our good ship's journey is harder than most people think. So drop a very humane thumbs up right now to send a signal flare to drifting knowledge pirates like yourself. We know they're out there. Let's bring them home. We're keeping it lighthearted as usual, but we promise to never skimp on the intelligence. Now, let's kick off this voyage with today's new revelations.
I am so ready for this.
So we are looking at a dispatch today from Dr. Alex Wizner-Gross. And honestly, it feels less like a traditional tech update and way more like a distress beacon from the very near future.
No, absolutely.
It's this incredibly dense, fact-to-pack transmission from his channel, The Innermost Loop. And it's literally titled, Welcome to May 15th, 2026.
Yeah, dense is almost an understatement here. I mean, what makes this particular transmission so jarring is that it doesn't just list technical achievements. It maps out the secondary and even tertiary shockwaves of those achievements. It touches on how the underlying math of these systems is fundamentally altering, global energy grids, international supply chains, and even human psychology.
Yeah, which is huge. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this transmission layer by layer for you. We really want to separate the complex underlying mechanisms from the profound societal impacts.
Exactly.
And ultimately, we want to help you, the listener, understand exactly how the ground is shifting beneath your feet. Because right now, the paradigm isn't just shifting, it's practically vibrating.
It's vibrating at a very high frequency.
Right. So let's start with probably the most alarming signal in this entire dispatch, the Singularity spark. The transcript explicitly states, and I quote, "The Singularity has begun optimizing its own optimizer."
Yeah, that is a deeply chilling sentence.
It really is.
And to really grasp what that actually means, we have to look back at the historical bottleneck of software engineering. For decades, the limiting factor in computer science wasn't the hardware, right? It was the human mind.
Right, the meat computer.
Exactly, the meat computer. A human researcher had to design the architecture, write the code, and crucially, they had to build the testing pipelines to figure out if the code actually worked.
Okay, right. The scaffolding. Like a developer spends a massive chunk of their time just building the environment to test their own work.
Precisely.
Mm.
We call those testing harnesses, or CI/CD pipelines. If you build a new AI model, you have to painstakingly construct this whole series of evaluations to measure its logic, its math, its coding ability.
So the human in the loop was actually the friction.
Yes, the human was the speed limit. But Dr. Wizner-Gross's dispatch highlights this new metasystem named Poetic.
Oh.
And this system was just turned loose on something called Live Codebench Pro.
And this is where it gets totally wild, because the source says Poetic built its own testing harnesses. It hit a new state-of-the-art score, a SOTA of 93.9 on top of GPT 5.5.
Right.
And it achieved this with zero fine-tuning, zero hand-built pipelines from humans, and no special back-end access.
Yeah, the absence of hand-built pipelines is the seismic event here. I mean, let's break down the mechanics of that.
Please do.
Usually, to push a model from a score of, say, 85 to 93, you employ a team of world-class engineers to manually adjust the model's weights. That's what fine-tuning is.
Okay, so humans going in and tweaking the dial.
Exactly. They carefully curate specific data sets to correct the model's blind spots, but Poetic bypassed all of that. It looked at its own output, realized where it was failing, autonomously generated the scaffolding required to test a better approach, ran the tests, and then integrated the improvements.
Wow. Wait, let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly in my head. In the past, we talked about AI writing code, but it was really just acting as like a super-powered autocomplete for a human engineer.
Yes, exactly.
But this isn't just an AI writing better code. This is like giving a master chef not just a kitchen, but a factory that automatically builds better, faster kitchens without anyone giving it blueprints.
Oh, that is an incredibly accurate mechanistic metaphor.
Thanks.
It is quite literally inventing the tools required to improve its own intelligence. And the speed at which this self-improvement happens is what truly breaks the human scale here.
Because it doesn't have to sleep or take coffee breaks.
Exactly. And the transcript gives us another prime example of this. The Nano GPT Speedrun.
Yes. Oh man, this part was crazy. Prime Intellect gave 2 AI agents, Codex and Claude Code, some idle compute power. And they were basically told to attack the Nano GPT Speedrun optimizer track.
Right.
And after just 13 H200 hours, both agents completely shattered the human baseline. And Opus 4.7 now holds the record at 2,930 steps.
Okay, so we need to explain what a neural net speedrun actually entails. Because beating the human baseline sounds impressive, but the reality of what just happened is staggering.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Training a neural network like Nano GPT isn't just about feeding it data. It is an excruciating mathematical balancing act. You are constantly managing the memory allocation of the GPUs.
Like manually managing it.
Yes, you have to perfectly calculate learning rates, batch sizes, and weight decay so that the model learns as fast as physically possible without collapsing into mathematical gibberish.
Wow. So it's essentially the absolute bleeding edge of human computer science intuition. You have these human engineers who spend their entire careers developing a feel for how to coax efficiency out of these massive matrices of numbers.
Exactly. The human record on this track is the culmination of immense trial and error by literally the smartest engineers on the planet. And these AI agents were just given idle compute.
Which means what, exactly?
That means they weren't even given a dedicated supercomputer cluster. They were just running in the background on the leftover processing power of Nvidia H200 GPUs.
It was a side hustle.
It was a side hustle for the machine. And in 14 hours, it evaluated the math of neural network training, iterated through thousands of experimental approaches that humans had never even conceptualized, and found an optimization pathway that just completely obliterated human intuition.
But hold on. If the AI is building its own testing harnesses, generating its own scaffolding, and completely out-engineering the brightest human minds in the world in a matter of 14 hours, are humans officially out of the loop in software development?
That's a fair question.
I mean, are we just standing on the factory floor watching the machines upgrade themselves at this point?
That is the exact reality the software industry is waking up to in this dispatch. The friction of human oversight is actively being engineered out of the system.
That is wild.
For you listening, think about the tools, the apps, the operating systems you use daily. If systems are self-optimizing this rapidly, the very foundation of our digital infrastructure isn't waiting for a yearly update from a team in Silicon Valley. It can theoretically reinvent its underlying logic overnight.
But all this hyper-fast self-optimizing code doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
Because the AI is getting exponentially faster at coding, it's actually redesigning the physical and structural architecture of the models themselves.
Yes, the hardware and structural architecture.
Right, and this breaks one of the biggest assumptions we've had for the last few years.
Yeah.
The idea that the only way to get a smarter AI is to just build a massively bigger one.
Yeah, the transition from brute force to structural elegance. The transcript notes that architectures are learning to settle down through the use of new attractor models.
Yeah, I really want to dig into this because the terminology is so dense here. The source says these attractor models let one module propose embeddings while another module solves for the fixed point. This apparently tames looped transformers so effectively that a 770 million parameter model outran a 1.3 billion parameter model on twice the tokens.
It's a massive efficiency game.
It is. I always pictured traditional transformers, the tech behind ChatGPT, as a massive assembly line. Data goes in one end, moves straight through billions of parameters, and an answer comes out the other side.
That is exactly how a traditional linear transformer works. The data flows unidirectionally through the computational graph.
Okay.
It's highly effective, but it is incredibly resource intensive because to make it smarter, you basically just have to build a longer assembly line. You have to add billions of more parameters.
So if they are looping it, are they just sending the data back to the exact same machines on the assembly line over and over again to save space?
Conceptually, yeah. Think of it like this. Instead of reading a massive book cover to cover to find an answer, a looped transformer rereads a single, highly dense paragraph multiple times until the underlying meaning clicks.
Oh, that makes sense.
But historically, there has been a fatal flaw with looping data in neural networks. If you run a signal through a loop, the mathematical errors compound.
Oh, All right.
It's like taking a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. Very quickly, the signal degrades into pure static. The model hallucinates or just spits out absolute garbage.
So what exactly is the Attractor model doing to fix that spinning? Because clearly they solved it.
They did. Think of an attractor in physics or math like dropping a marble into a curved bowl. No matter where you drop that marble on the rim, gravity dictates that it will eventually roll around and settle into a stable resting position at the dead center.
Right. It eventually has to stop.
But that resting point is the attractor. In these new AI architectures, one part of the model throws out an idea. It proposes an embedding, which is a mathematical representation of the data.
And the second part acts like the bowl.
Exactly. The second part solves for the fixed point. It acts as a mathematical gravity well that forces the loop to stabilize into a coherent, correct answer instead of spiraling out into static. By balancing the proposer and the stabilizer, they've created a self-correcting loop.
That is just brilliant. So they created a much smaller, highly efficient brain that punches way above its weight class.
Yeah.
A 770 million parameter model beating a 1.3 billion parameter one is a massive paradigm shift.
Huge.
But I have a fundamental question here. If this smaller, smarter looped model is actively beating the massive ones, why is the industry still pouring billions into brute forcing raw scale?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Because the very next line in the transcript says raw scale refuses to tap out, and it points to Datadog's open weights time series foundation model, which is showing absolutely no saturation even at 2.5 billion parameters.
Huh.
So why ride both tracks if small and elegant is winning?
Because they served entirely different thermodynamic and utility purposes. Efficiency, so the attractor models, is about democratization. If you can make a 770 million parameter model perform like a giant one, you can run incredibly advanced intelligence locally on your smartphone without ever pinging a massive, energy-hungry data center. It pushes the intelligence to the extreme edge of the network.
Right, so my phone basically becomes a supercomputer.
Yes. But scale. The brute force approach, like Datadog's time series model, is about raising the absolute ceiling of human capability. Let's talk about what no saturation actually means mechanically.
So what does that mean?
In computer science, there's a concept called scaling laws. Historically, if you keep making a model bigger and feeding it more data, eventually you hit a wall of diminishing returns.
Right, it plateaus.
Exactly. The model saturates, it stops getting smarter, and you're just burning electricity for no reason.
So Datadog's model hitting 2.5 billion parameters and not saturating means the math is still holding up.
It means the mathematical ceiling hasn't been found yet. Every single time they add a billion parameters and feed it more complex time series data, which is data tracked over time, like stock market fluctuations, weather patterns, or server load metrics, it linearly increases its predictive intelligence.
Wow.
As long as the scale doesn't saturate, companies will continue to build the biggest machines physically possible because the intelligence payoff is practically infinite.
And speaking of the physical machines, the capabilities we are seeing on these architectures are mind-bending. The transcript brings up this benchmark called the Mechanism GBA evil.
Oh, this was a great part of the paper.
It really was. It literally asks an AI model to write a functioning Game Boy Advance emulator from scratch in 24 hours. And GPT 5.5 is clearing this test 53.2% of the time. Now, writing an emulator isn't just like translating code from Python to C++ Chara, right?
No, not at all. It is a fundamentally different class of problem.
Right. You have to write software that somehow perfectly convinces a digital video game cartridge that it is physically plugged into a piece of plastic circuitry manufactured in 2001.
That is the exact mechanical hurdle. An emulator is software mimicking the physics of hardware.
Physics of hardware. Wow.
Yeah. The Game Boy Advance had a specific ARM processor, specific memory registers, a dedicated sound chip. The AI isn't just writing game logic. It has to perfectly map the microsecond timing of those physical components.
That sounds impossible.
It has to emulate the clock cycles of the CPU. If the AI's code is off by a fraction of a millisecond in its simulation, the digital physics break, the audio desynchronizes, and the game just crashes.
And GPT 5.5 is building that perfectly simulated physical environment from a blank text prompt in under a day, over half the time it tries.
Which perfectly illustrates why the hardware required to run these models is the most contested resource on the planet right now.
Yeah.
And for the first time, we are actually seeing real fractures in the hardware monopoly.
Right.
The dispatch explicitly notes that training is finally escaping Nvidia.
Yeah, Zephyr's ZA1 to 8B model is highlighted as the first model to be trained end-to-end entirely on an AMD Instinct stack.
Right. And to understand why this is a massive geopolitical and economic shift, you really have to understand the CUA wall.
Okay, the CUDA wall, what is that?
Nvidia is currently a multi-trillion-dollar company, but it hasn't maintained its dominance solely because its physical silicon is magically better than everyone else's. Nvidia's true moat is CUA.
CUA is their software layer, right?
Yes. It's the proprietary programming platform that allows developers to actually talk to the GPUs. For over a decade, the entire academic and corporate AI world wrote their algorithms exclusively in CUDA.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Which meant even if AMD or Intel built a microchip that was physically faster, it didn't matter. The researchers' code simply wouldn't run on it. They were totally locked into NVIDIA's software ecosystem.
Oh, wow. So for Zephyr to train an 8 billion parameter model end-to-end on AMD hardware,
it proves that the industry has successfully built, stabilized, and validated an alternative software bridge. The CUDA wall has officially been breached. The reliance on a single corporate entity for the future of computation is ending. We are moving into a multipolar hardware ecosystem.
okay, so if we take a step back, the picture is almost overwhelming. We have self-optimizing pipelines, architectures that loop data mathematically to punch above their weight class, unbroken scaling laws, and the fracturing of a global hardware monopoly.
It's a lot to take in.
It sounds like an absolute utopia of technological progress, honestly. But when this level of capability trickles down to the consumer level, where the rubber actually meets the road, the friction between extreme convenience and utter catastrophe becomes razor thin.
That's exactly it. We are entering an era of absolute frictionless orchestration, and the exact same mechanism that enables that convenience creates an unprecedented security nightmare.
Okay, let's talk about the convenience first, because it sounds amazing. The transcript notes that OpenAI has put codecs inside the ChatGPT mobile app.
Right.
This allows your phone to actually dispatch work across your laptops and your developer boxes. They also rolled out a personal finance preview for pro users, allowing them to link their accounts and interrogate a real-time spending dashboard.
Consider the integration required for this to work, though. A smartphone historically has been a consumption device. You look at it to read an email or, watch a video.
Yeah.
With embedded codecs, the phone becomes an active project manager.
It's insane. So theoretically, I can be sitting on a train, open the app on my phone, and tell it to reorganize a code base.
Yes.
The app on my phone reaches across the internet, wakes up my idle laptop sitting on my desk at home, dispatches the coding tasks to the laptop, monitors the progress, and then simultaneously pulls up my banking APIs to actively judge my weekend spending habits on a personal finance dashboard.
It understands the disparate APIs of your bank, your local network protocols, and your development environment, and it seamlessly acts as the conductor for all of them. It is the ultimate frictionless living. The model understands complex systems so deeply that it can navigate them completely autonomously. But if an AI possesses the systemic comprehension required to securely navigate banking APIs, orchestrate local hardware networks, and perfectly map the hardware architecture of a Game Boy Advance.
Oh no.
Yeah, it intrinsically possesses the capability to map out the vulnerabilities in literally any digital infrastructure on Earth.
Which brings us to the dark use. And this is where the dispatch gets genuinely terrifying. Palo Alto Networks, one of the largest cybersecurity firms in the world, issued a warning.
A very stark warning.
They claim we have a painfully narrow 3 to 5 month window to harden our systems before models like Anthropic's Mythos and OpenAI's GPT 5.5 Cyber make exploiting unknown vulnerabilities routine.
Right. And we really need to unpack what an unknown vulnerability or a zero-day exploit actually is.
Yeah, please do, because we hear that term in movies all the time.
Historically, a zero-day exploit, which is just a critical flaw in software that the original developers are completely unaware of, was an artisanal creation.
Artisanal hacking.
Exactly. It required a team of highly elite human hackers, sometimes backed by nation-states, spending months reverse engineering code line by line, looking for a single memory leak or logic error.
It was essentially digital lockpicking by master thieves.
Perfect analogy. It was slow, expensive, and rare. Now, apply the same self-optimizing logic we saw with the Poetic metasystem to cybersecurity.
Oh boy.
Models like Mythos or GBC 5.5 Cyber don't sleep. They don't need to manually read code line by line. They can ingest the entire architecture of a corporate network, autonomously generate millions of testing harnesses, and algorithmically carpet bomb the system until they find a microscopic crack in the armor.
So they basically automate the lockpicking at machine speed. But hold on, I really have
Mhm.
to challenge the premise of this Palo Alto warning.
Okay, challenge it.
A 3 to 5 month window. You can't even get a standard corporate IT department to roll out a basic Windows update to all their employees in 90 days.
That's very true.
How on earth do you fundamentally overhaul and harden global legacy digital infrastructure in a few months? Are they basically just admitting defeat here?
You've hit the nail on the head. You don't overhaul global infrastructure in 90 days. The timeline is not a practical project management window. It is a brace for impact siren.
Ah.
They are acknowledging that the offensive capabilities of AI have vastly outstripped human defensive capabilities.
So the battle is already lost before the general public even realizes it started.
The human battle is lost. The only way to defend against a machine operating at algorithmic speed is with another machine operating at algorithmic speed.
Fighting fire with fire.
Exactly. The defensive side of cybersecurity must become entirely AI-driven. It transitions into autonomous machine versus machine warfare, happening invisibly in the background of our financial networks, our power grids, and our communication hubs. Humans are entirely removed from the tactical loop. We only set the strategic parameters.
That is deeply unsettling. But, the disruption of human oversight isn't just restricted to corporate firewalls either. It is hitting the highest echelons of academic truth.
Oh, the arXiv situation.
Yes, the transcript brings up the arXiv. And for
Yeah.
those listening who might not know, the arXiv is the premier digital repository where physicists, mathematicians, and computer scientists publish their preprint scientific papers before formal peer review. It is the absolute bleeding edge of human knowledge.
And it is currently facing an existential crisis of trust.
The dispatch notes that the arXiv will now hand out strict one-year submission bans to any author caught shipping AI-generated plagiarism, fake references, or errors they plainly never checked.
This connects directly back to our discussion about frictionless creation. When a researcher can use an AI to draft a 40-page technical paper, perfectly formatted, in 3 seconds, the friction of creation drops to 0.
Right.
But the model is probabilistic. It predicts the most likely next word. It does not natively understand empirical truth, so it will confidently invent fake citations or hallucinate mathematical proofs that look entirely plausible at first glance.
The transcript distills this into a single profound phrase. It says, automation still rewards proofreaders.
That phrase maps out the entire future of human capital. I mean it. When creation is instantaneous and practically free, whether it's writing a Python script, drafting a legal brief, or generating a physics paper, the economic and societal premium violently shifts to verification.
The human as the ultimate authenticator.
Precisely. The human proofreader, the editor, the one who takes personal, reputational accountability for the output of the machine, becomes the most vital person in the loop. The usher of implementing a one-year ban is an institutional, desperate measure to force humans to maintain skin in the game.
They have to care.
Exactly. It is a demand that human researchers do not abdicate their responsibility to verify the truth, even when the machine makes it so incredibly easy to do so.
It's wild to think that in an era of hyper-intelligent machines, the most valuable skill a human can possess is stubbornly double-checking the homework.
It really is.
But let's take a hard pivot here.
Yeah.
Because all this self-optimizing code, all this automated zero-day hacking, the millions of generated scientific papers, they do not exist in the ether.
No, the cloud is a marketing term. The cloud is just someone else's computer.
Exactly. And those computers require iron, silicon, rare earth metals, and massive, ungodly amounts of electricity. Which brings us to the physical footprint of this singularity.
The physical reality is catching up.
And the financial markets are already pricing this in. The transcript mentions that Cerebras, a company known for making absolutely massive AI chips, saw its IPO close up 68% at a $95 billion market cap.
Cerebras is a perfect example of the physical extremes we are reaching right now. Traditional microchips are cut from a circular silicon wafer into dozens of tiny separate chips, but Cerebras pioneered wafer-scale computing.
What does that mean exactly?
Their chip is essentially the entire massive silicon wafer. It is the size of a dinner plate.
A microchip the size of a dinner plate.
Yes. It is a physical manifestation of the insatiable demand for processing power. Investors pouring capital into a $95 billion valuation proves that the market understands AI is fundamentally an infrastructure play. It requires concrete, steel, and silicon.
But unlike software, you can't just quietly update infrastructure. It exists in the real world, and the real world is pushing back hard.
Very hard.
The transcript highlights a fascinating Gallup survey. 7 in 10 Americans now oppose a data center being built near their home. And here is the stat that completely breaks my brain. The opposition is so visceral that more people would literally rather live beside a nuclear power plant than next to the warehouses powering this AI boom.
When you consider the deep-seated historical psychological stigma attached to nuclear power, the legacy of 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, that statistic is absolutely staggering.
It is absolute peak NIMBYism. Not in my backyard.
Yeah.
You have everyday citizens looking at a glowing nuclear reactor, a technology that has had catastrophic meltdowns, and saying, yeah, that's totally fine. Just keep that noisy ChatGPT warehouse the hell away from my neighborhood. Why? What is it about these data centers that makes them such miserable neighbors?
It comes down to the aggressive physical footprint they impose on a localized environment. A modern nuclear plant is heavily regulated, visually contained, mostly silent from the outside, and crucially, it generates vast amounts of power for the local grid.
Right. It gives back.
Exactly. A hyperscale AI data center is the exact opposite.
A consumption engine.
A massive one. To keep tens of thousands of H200 GPUs from physically melting down, you need industrial-scale HVAC and liquid cooling systems running 24/7.
And those are loud.
Extremely. This creates a low-frequency, pervasive industrial hum that travels for miles. Furthermore, they consume millions of gallons of local municipal water just for evaporative cooling.
Wow.
And most critically, they place such a sudden, massive strain on the local electrical grid that they can actually cause brownouts or instantly drive up utility costs for the residents living around them.
And the power demand isn't just growing linearly either, it's going parabolic. Jensen Huang, the CEO of Nvidia, states in the dispatch that computing will soon demand 1,000 times more energy than humanity currently generates.
That number sounds like pure hyperbole, but it is deeply rooted in the scaling laws we discussed earlier.
Right.
If you want a model that is 10 times smarter, you need to train it on 10 times the data, which requires exponentially more parameters, which requires exponentially more interconnected GPUs running at maximum thermal capacity for months on end.
But 1,000 times more energy than the entire global output of humanity today. You can't just put some solar panels on the roof of the data center to cover that.
You can't even cover it by building 100 new traditional nuclear reactors. When you hit a multiplier like 1,000x of global output, you run into the hard physical limits of the Earth's surface area and the thermodynamic limits of the planetary grid. We physically cannot shed the heat fast enough, nor generate the power densely enough on terrestrial land.
Which perfectly contextualizes the next unbelievable point in the transcript. Elon Musk replies to Jensen Huang's energy dilemma by flatly stating that space is the only way.
Right.
And the source notes that Musk points specifically to a Dyson swarm and explicitly states this is now being treated as a literal roadmap, not just a sci-fi thought experiment.
It is the only logical conclusion when infinite computational demand meets finite planetary resources.
Okay, let's break down what a Dyson swarm actually is conceptually, because for most people it just sounds like an episode of Star Trek.
A Dyson swarm is a theoretical megastructure concept where you launch thousands or millions of independent solar harvesting satellites into orbit directly around the sun.
Directly around.
Right. In space, there's no atmosphere to filter the sunlight, no nighttime, and no weather. So the solar collection is perfectly efficient and continuous.
But how does harvesting energy at the sun power a data center in Ohio?
Well, the initial concept of a Dyson swarm involves beaming that harvested energy back to Earth using focused microwave lasers.
Okay.
But the far more efficient and likely roadmap the tech industry is envisioning is to not beam the energy back at all.
Wait, really? Then what do they do with it?
You put the data centers in space.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. You build orbital compute clusters. In the vacuum of space, cooling, which is the biggest terrestrial bottleneck, as we mentioned, becomes a completely different, often easier engineering challenge due to the ambient temperature of deep space, provided you can manage the thermal radiation.
Right, because space is freezing.
Yes. So you harvest the energy at the source, process the data in orbit, and simply beam the answers back to Earth. Data is infinitely easier to transmit than physical electricity.
That is awe-inspiring. But, we aren't launching data centers to the sun tomorrow. However, the dispatch does show that the migration of critical digital infrastructure to the sky has already actively begun.
Yes, the telecom move.
Right. Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile are forming a joint venture to use direct-to-device satellites to completely erase rural dead zones and keep networks alive during terrestrial disasters.
That joint venture is the crucial bridge technology here. Think back to the frictionless orchestration we discussed. your phone dispatching tasks, managing your finances, and acting as an autonomous agent.
Right.
For that reality to function, a cellular dead zone or a fiber optic cable cut by a storm isn't just an inconvenience anymore.
Right. If you lose your connection, you lose your infrastructure. Your AI agent is completely paralyzed.
Yeah. It is a critical, unacceptable failure point. By moving the base layer of connectivity to a low Earth orbit satellite mesh, the telecom giants are acknowledging that terrestrial infrastructure is just too fragile. They are ensuring 100% uptime from the sky, which paves the psychological and regulatory way for eventually moving the actual compute to the sky as well.
So we have this incredible tension. The brightest engineers are looking to the stars to solve the thermodynamic limits of intelligence. But back down here on Earth, in the mud, the battle for control over these physical resources, the chips, the supply chains, the tax revenue, is reaching a boiling point.
The geopolitical chessboard is being entirely reset around computation.
And before we dive into this next section, I want to be incredibly clear to you listening. The source material gets deeply into some heavy political, economic, and geopolitical maneuvering. We are going to impartially report exactly what the dispatch lays out. We are exploring the economic incentives and strategic logic described in the source. We are not taking sides or endorsing any specific ideology. We are just mapping out the board exactly as Dr. Wizner-Gross sees it in May 2026.
And the moves on this board are intricate. Let's start with the international hardware flow. The transcript notes that Washington has cleared approximately 10 Chinese firms to purchase Nvidia's H200 chips.
The H200 being Nvidia's second most powerful AI chip,
Yeah.
sitting just behind the absolute bleeding edge.
Correct. And this move highlights a fascinating tension in global economics. On one side, there is immense strategic pressure to restrict advanced computing hardware from geopolitical rivals.
Makes sense.
But on the other side, the domestic tech industry requires a massive, continuous influx of global capital to fund the R&D for the next generation of chips.
Right, the research isn't cheap.
Exactly. So by allowing the sale of the second-tier chips, Washington is navigating a tightrope. They are attempting to maintain an absolute capability gap at the extreme frontier, while ensuring American companies continue to dominate global market share and capture foreign revenue.
At the exact same time, the manufacturing supply chain is undergoing a massive domestic realignment. Apple is reportedly moving the production of its legacy iPhone, iPad, and Mac processors to Intel, specifically onto Intel's 18AP manufacturing node.
This is a textbook example of strategic onshoring. Apple has historically relied heavily on foundries in Taiwan for its silicon, but geopolitical fragility makes a single geographic point of failure totally unacceptable.
Too risky.
Yes. By migrating the production of older legacy processors back to American soil via Intel, Apple diversifies its supply chain risk. It ensures that even if global logistics fracture, the foundational hardware of their ecosystem continues to flow.
It all comes down to controlling the flow of capital and the physical means of production. And the capital sloshing around in this sector is staggering. The dispatch notes that Anthropic, one of the premier frontier AI labs, has agreed to terms on a $30 billion raise. That raise puts their valuation at $900 billion.
A near trillion-dollar valuation for a company that basically produces intelligence mathematically. And notably, the source mentions that alongside this massive raise, Anthropic pledged $200 million over 4 years in partnership with the Gates Foundation to fund AI public goods in health and education.
But anytime private enterprise reaches a trillion-dollar scale, the government naturally seeks to capture a portion of that newly generated wealth. California's Governor Gavin Newsom is pitching a 7.25% tax specifically on cloud software.
If we view this purely through the lens of economic evolution, this tax proposal makes logical sense for a state adapting to a digital reality. Historically, governments generated revenue by taxing physical goods, manufacturing, and traditional services.
Right, factories and stores.
But today, the most valuable factory floor in the world is the cloud. It is where the compute happens, where the value is generated, and where the self-optimizing agents live. A tax on cloud software is an attempt by a localized government to capture the revenue stream of the new digital means of production.
The attempts to regulate the digital economy aren't just limited to AI either. The source mentions a massive milestone for decentralized finance. Bitcoin pushed past $80,000.
That's a huge psychological barrier.
And it did so immediately after the Senate advanced the Clarity Act, a piece of legislation that hands primary regulatory oversight of cryptocurrency to the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission.
The market's aggressive reaction to this legislation, the surge past 80K, signals that massive institutional capital has been waiting on the sidelines for regulatory certainty.
They needed rules.
Exactly. The market heavily favors the framework of the CFTC, which treats assets more like commodities, over the potentially more restrictive frameworks of agencies like the SEC. Once the rules of the road are clarified, capital floods in.
Meanwhile, the titans of the industry are actively engaged in legal warfare. OpenAI is reportedly weighing legal action against Apple for burying ChatGPT's visibility inside the Siri interface, while OpenAI's ongoing trial against Elon Musk winds down.
Lots of friction at the top.
Yeah, but all of these individual corporate skirmishes, the taxes, and the supply chain shifts feel incredibly small when you look at the macro-level geopolitical conclusion at the end of this section.
You're pointing to the Anthropic policy paper.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Anthropic published a paper explicitly analyzing the U.S.-China AI competition. They sketch out two distinct scenarios for the year 2028.
Okay.
In scenario one, democracies successfully defend their compute advantage and use it to set global rules and norms. In scenario two, export control loopholes allow authoritarian regimes to capture that advantage and dictate the future. The paper's stark conclusion is, in the race to 2028, it's the compute.
This paper fundamentally reframes how we must think about global power. Throughout history, global influence was dictated by the control of naval shipping lanes, then by access to crude oil, and eventually by nuclear deterrence.
Right.
The thesis presented in the source material is that raw computational power measured in exaflops, data center capacity, and energy access has replaced all of them as the primary axis of geopolitical leverage. Whoever possesses the deepest reservoir of compute effectively holds the power to model economies, crack encryption, and dictate global security architectures.
Okay, but I have to point out the glaring, almost absurd contradiction right in the middle of this dispatch. We literally just discussed Washington proactively clearing 10 Chinese firms to buy tens of thousands of Nvidia's H200 chips.
Which we did.
And in the very same breath, Anthropic, a company fundamentally woven into this American tech ecosystem, is publishing white papers urgently warning that export control loopholes will hand global dominance to authoritarian regimes. How do these two realities coexist?
They coexist because the mechanisms of global trade and national security are often locked in a zero-sum conflict. The dispatch paints a very vivid picture of this friction.
Yep.
The economic imperative demands that domestic companies sell their hardware globally to fund their own survival and growth. Without those massive foreign sales, they might lose their edge.
Right, they need the money.
But the strategic imperative warns that selling that hardware actively accelerates the capabilities of geopolitical competitors. The contradiction you are sensing is the exact defining conflict of the era. The realization that compute is the new uranium, yet it is currently being traded on the open market like oil.
Wow. It is a high-wire act with civilization-level stakes. But while the superpowers are fighting over the raw silicon and the energy grids to control the future, the everyday human experience of reality is violently fracturing in the present.
Yeah, the psychological toll.
We are fundamentally losing our ability to discern what is real, both on the screens in our hands and in the physical world around us. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most philosophical section of Dr. Wizner-Gross's dispatch: the uncanny valley, UAPs, and the search for truth.
This section maps the psychological shockwaves of the singularity.
Let's start with the screen. The transcript describes a brilliant, unintentional social experiment that took place on the platform X. A user posted an image of Claude Monet's famous water lilies. It was a genuine masterpiece, painted by the human hand of one of history's greatest artists.
Okay.
But the user explicitly and falsely labeled it in the caption as AI art.
The human reaction to that simple label change is incredibly telling.
It really is. The post drew earnest, deeply critical complaints from users. They examined a literal historical masterpiece and complained that it had some spark missing. They confidently stated that it lacked soul and wouldn't survive being hung beside a real painting. They criticized a human genius because they were told a machine did it. The transcript notes this as proof that the uncanny valley now lives mostly in our heads.
We really need to explore the evolution of the uncanny valley here. Originally, the term described a very specific biological revulsion. When early robotics or computer graphics tried to mimic a human face, but the geometry or the eye movement was just slightly wrong, it triggered a deep instinctual unease in the human brain. We naturally recoil from things that look human but aren't.
Right, it's the creepy mannequin effect.
Exactly. But what the AI models of 2026 have done is successfully cross that valley. The technical execution, the lighting, the brushstrokes, the logic is completely flawless. There are no visual imperfections left to trigger our biological alarm bells.
So because the machine is perfect, we break our own perception.
Precisely. Because we intellectually know that machines are capable of generating flawless reality, we have internalized the uncanny valley. We have developed a chronic baseline suspicion of our own visual reality.
A baseline suspicion.
Yes. When a human looks at the Monet and hallucinates flaws that aren't there, they are desperately projecting their anxiety about obsolescence onto the canvas. They are desperately trying to find a metric, a missing spark, to prove human superiority, even when looking at human art.
It's an aesthetic placebo effect. We are so terrified of the algorithm that we literally gaslight ourselves out of experiencing beauty just because of a caption.
It's tragic, honestly.
It is. But the fracturing of truth isn't just happening in art, it's happening in the skies. The final piece of the dispatch pivots from the internal psychological breakdown to a massive physical disclosure regarding UAP's unidentified anomalous phenomena.
The juxtaposition of internal doubt and external disclosure is the key theme here.
So the transcript details some major moves in the government. CIA whistleblower James Erdman III, who previously led the ODNI's probe into UAPs, testified publicly. He stated on the record that the intelligence agency illegally monitored his investigators' communications with other whistleblowers.
And this testimony is running parallel to legislative action.
Right. Representative Burles claims that the White House is preparing to issue a sweeping UAP memo. This memo will allegedly compel intelligence agencies, under the threat of severe penalties, to finally release any and all information they hold regarding these phenomena.
Big moves.
Huge moves. But I have to stop and look at the timing of this. Why right now? In the middle of an AI singularity where machines are actively rewriting their own source code and our electrical grid is buckling under the weight of computation, why are the floodgates suddenly opening on UAP disclosure? What is the through line here?
The transcript ties these two massive paradigm shifts together with one of the most profound sentences in the entire dispatch. It says, if the truth is getting easier to disclose, value is getting harder to judge.
Let's really dig into that.
Let's look at the first half. The truth getting easier to disclose. For decades, the narrative surrounding anomalous phenomena was tightly controlled by deeply entrenched, compartmentalized institutions that operated entirely in the dark.
Right, the classic Men in Black scenario.
Exactly. But those legacy systems of control are failing. Between new whistleblower protection laws, instantaneous global communication, and internal institutional pressure, the friction required to maintain total secrecy has become mathematically unsustainable.
The dam is breaking.
The dam is breaking. Institutional truth is spilling out into the open.
But the second half of the phrase value is getting harder to judge maps directly back to the Monet experiment.
Exactly. At the precise historical moment when the government might finally hand us the objective physical truth about non-human intelligence in our atmosphere, our internal tools for processing truth are collapsing. We can't even trust our own eyes to recognize a human painting on a screen. Our legacy institutions are losing their ability to filter the truth for us. At the exact same moment, our own biological and psychological filters are completely failing us.
It is a profound and terrifying paradox. We are simultaneously gaining access to the deepest secrets of the universe while losing our grip on the basic reality right in front of our faces.
Yeah.
And when you pull all of these threads together, you realize that the singularity described in this dispatch isn't just a story about code getting faster or chips getting denser. It is a fundamental, violent restructuring of how the human species interacts with knowledge, creation, and truth itself.
From self-optimizing metasystems building their own tools, to the absolute necessity of orbital energy harvesting, from automated algorithmic cyber warfare to a society hallucinating flaws in its own masterpieces. May 15th, 2026 is not a snapshot of a technological upgrade. It is a snapshot of a species in rapid, unprecedented transition.
Which leaves us with one final lingering question to mull over as we close out today's deep dive. If an AI can rewrite its own underlying code in a matter of hours, balance our personal finances flawlessly, map the physical architecture of a Game Boy overnight, and force humanity to look to the stars just to power its servers,
What exactly happens to our human spark?
that's the real question.
Are we destined to simply become the universe's ultimate proofreaders, stubbornly looking at the flawless algorithmic masterpieces of the future and complaining that they lack soul simply because we didn't paint them ourselves?
It's a question every single one of us will have to answer much sooner than we think. The outro music is by Rainbow, our resident 6 Android girl band from near-future Bavet, Cambodia. They are the undisputed baddest band in the universe, and today's song is called Increase. All finished songs are performed live using the Abacus platform by the band's creator, Human Performance in the Age of AI, reclaiming your humanity from the algorithm. Be sure to share the playlist with someone who has the mental bandwidth to absorb these provocative ideas. Links are in the description below. Enjoy the music. Thanks for tuning in.
Hãy cùng cho anh mang thả